There is a jaw in a drawer in Cape Town. It belongs to a woman. She died approximately 7,900 years ago on the southern coast of what is now South Africa, in a rock shelter above the Indian Ocean. She was buried there. She was excavated in 1931. She was cataloged, studied, moved to a museum tray, and she has been waiting ever since. Her lower jaw intact, her third molar still rooted, her cortical bone holding its shape with a patience that has outlasted every civilization that has risen and fallen since she took her last breath. Her catalog number is Matjes River 1. And in December of 2025, a study published in the journal Nature used her DNA and the DNA of 27 others buried in the same region to confirm something that stopped the field cold. Every single individual buried at that site more than 1,400 years ago falls completely outside the measured range of modern human genetic variation. Not at the edge of it, not at the extreme end of it, outside it entirely, including the variation present in their own most direct living descendants. That means the woman in that drawer is genetically more different from you than any person alive on Earth today. More different than a Mongolian herder, more different than a New Guinean Highlander, more different than anyone from any population that has ever been sampled and studied in the history of this science. And the only reason we know this is because she is dead. Professor Mattias Jakobsson and Professor Carina Schlebusch, working across Uppsala University in Sweden and the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, led the team that sequenced the whole genomes of those 28 individuals. Professor Marlies Lombard, also at Johannesburg, helped anchor the archaeological context. What they found wasn't just old DNA, it was a different depth of our own species. Not a different species, the same one, but a depth that no longer exists in undiluted form anywhere on this planet. And yet, the data said the exact opposite of what we expected. Every documentary you have ever watched about ancient human origins has told the story of the San and Khoisan peoples as survivors, as the oldest, as the ones who held on. That framing is wrong. Not wrong in intent, wrong in direction. These people did not survive at the edge of the human story. They are standing at its center. The rest of us are the ones who moved away. The Matjes River Rock Shelter contains 5 distinct archaeological layers, 5 recognizable cultural periods, 5 sets of tool-making traditions laid down across 9,000 years of occupation. In Europe, every layer like that corresponds to a new people arriving. Different DNA, different migration event, different population. At Matjes River, across all 5 layers, the genetic profile does not change. The same population invented every tool, every cultural shift, every new technology, for 9 millennia. The same people, the same maternal lineage, without interruption. They were not waiting to be discovered, they were already there. They had always been there. And a migration they made, 8,000 years ago, moving north into what is now Malawi, left a genetic trace that researchers have only recently learned to read. A wave that reshaped populations thousands of kilometers away. From a people who never wrote their name down, who left us no language we can read. Before we go any further, I genuinely want to know something. If someone had asked you yesterday where human history truly begins, what place would you have named? Drop it in the comments. One line. I'm going to come back to it. Because by the end of this, your answer might surprise you. Every human origin story has a mixing bowl, a crucible, a place where populations converged, exchanged genes, pushed each other toward behavioral modernity. The standard model puts that crucible in East Africa, and for most of the human story, that's broadly accurate. But there's a place the mixing never reached. Around 130,000 years ago, the southern tip of Africa looked different than it does today. The Agulhas Plain, now submerged under the Indian Ocean, extended 90 kilometers beyond the current coastline. A population lived there, at the absolute tip of a continent, behind geography that functioned less like a border and more like a lock. Climate gradients, distance, the sheer logistics of reaching the south from anywhere else. This was not wilderness, this was a refuge, and the difference matters enormously. The Jakobsson 2025 study established something that took the genomic data from all 28 individuals to confirm. No detectable external gene flow entered this population from approximately 200,000 years ago until roughly 1,400 years ago. 200,000 years. That is not a long time in the way we usually use that phrase. That is a span of isolation that makes the entire recorded history of every civilization on Earth, Egypt, Rome, China, every empire that ever rose and crumbled, look like a footnote in the middle of the story. But here's where it gets strange. In that isolation, this population did not stagnate. They did not simplify. They evolved 490 genetic variants that no other human population on Earth has ever independently produced. 490. Some of these variants affect how the kidney processes water. Some affect how the skin responds to ultraviolet radiation. And more than 40% of them, more than 40%, are associated with neurons, with brain growth, with the specific cognitive capacities that separate us from every other species and possibly from every other version of ourselves that came before. The 5 cultural layers at Matjes River tell the same story from a different direction. Archaeologists found tool-making traditions that changed, new technologies, new techniques, new approaches across those 9,000 years of occupation. In Europe, whenever the tools change, the people change too. New migrants arrived, new DNA, new population. Here, the DNA never shifted. The culture innovated, the people stayed. The same genetic population invented every new tool, every new technique for 9 uninterrupted millennia. Isolation, the standard model says, is a disadvantage, a bottleneck, a vulnerability. The data from Southern Africa says something else entirely. It says that when you are isolated long enough and the environment is stable enough and the population is large enough, you don't stagnate, you go deep. You develop things that the mixing bowl never produces. And then the textbook says, all modern humans descend from an ancestral African population. That is technically true. What the Jakobsson data forces the field to reconsider is the direction of the statement. The split came first. The divergence came first. The Southern African lineage separated from all other human populations before any other population split on record. Which means the rest of humanity, every other group that exists, is the branch, not the trunk. The rest of humanity is the branch. Every branch has a date. In 2017, a paper published in Science pushed that date further back than anyone had gone before. Professor Schlebusch, then working across Uppsala University and the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, led a team that sequenced the genomes of 7 ancient individuals from KwaZulu-Natal. What she found changed the number that the entire field had been working with. The first modern human population divergence, her team calculated, occurred between 350,000 and 260,000 years ago. 350,000 years ago. At that moment in time, Neanderthals were thriving in Europe, Denisovans were moving across Asia. Behavioral modernity, art, ochre, symbolic thought, did not yet exist anywhere on Earth. And in southern Africa, a population was already beginning to accumulate the genetic profile that the Jakobsson 2025 study would later confirm as the most divergent branch of our species ever identified. Before fire was reliably controlled, before language had left any traceable archaeological record, before the species had a name for itself. This discovery was quietly published. Almost nobody outside the specialist literature talked about it, until now. The maternal lineage that traces most directly to this ancient population, haplogroup L0d, has a confirmed coalescence age of approximately 172,000 years. That's the date when all the L0d maternal lines we can find today converge back to a single woman. But the population divergence itself predates that maternal lineage by another 100,000 years or more. We are not talking about one ancient woman. We are talking about a population that was genetically separate before the maternal lineage we use to track them even formed. Here is the thread that connects that ancient history to a living person in Namibia today. In 2014, a research team led by Dr. Vanessa Hayes at the Garvan Institute of Medical Research and the University of Sydney recovered a complete mitochondrial genome from a 2,330-year-old skeleton found on the southern African coast. This man had spent his life harvesting shellfish from the Indian Ocean. His bones had been in the ground for over 2 millennia, and his maternal haplogroup, L0D2C1C, was a direct match to the Juhowansi San speakers currently living in Namibia and Botswana today. Not similar, not related in a general sense, the same molecular signature. Passed body to body, mother to child, without interruption for 2,300 years on the documented record, and for tens of thousands of years before that. You can draw a straight line from a shellfish collector who died before the Roman Empire reached Britain to a living community in the Kalahari, and the line does not break. But that continuity, that extraordinary unbroken thread, was about to encounter something it had never faced in 200,000 years. A specific event, a specific moment, a specific date when everything that had been sealed came open. Carbon dating of the youngest individuals in the Matjes River sequence, combined with the genomic data, points to approximately 1,400 years ago as the moment when external gene flow first became visible in the Southern African record. Not gradually, not as a slow seep, a contact event, dated, traceable, and its genetic consequences are still measurable in every living descendant of this population. Northeastern Namibia, a place called Nyai Nyai Conservancy, approximately 720 kilometers northeast of Windhoek. About 3,000 Juhowansi San people live here. They hold legal land rights granted in 1998. They speak a click language, a language with 5 distinct types of dental and alveolar clicks that linguists estimate diverged from all other language groups at least 100,000 years ago. Their culture is not a museum exhibit. It is a living practice, continuously refined, that connects without interruption to the Stone Age record. And their DNA, according to the Jakobsson 2025 study, retains approximately 80% of the ancient Southern African ancestral genome. 80%. That is the closest any living population comes to the genome that produced those 490 unique human variants. That is the highest recovery rate in any sampled group on Earth. And even that 80%, extraordinary as it is, means that 20% of the original genome has been replaced by external ancestry that entered no earlier than 1,400 years ago. The ancient individuals from Matjes River carry none of that 20%. They are the unedited version. They have been in a drawer in Cape Town since 1931. This isn't just ancient history. This is in your DNA right now. If you have ever taken a commercial DNA ancestry test, any of them, and your result shows any haplogroup in the L family, you are carrying a fraction of the genome assembled in Southern Africa over those 200,000 years of isolation. And even if your result shows no African ancestry at all, the 79 functional Homo sapiens specific variants identified in that ancient population, the ones linked to kidney function, UV protection, neuronal growth, are inside you. They are in every living human being. The question is not whether you carry their biology, you do. The question is how far your genome has traveled from the source. The Khomani San of South Africa's Northern Cape Province have a land title. 50,000 hectares of Kalahari returned to them in 1999 under post-apartheid legislation. Their total population, approximately 1,500 adults. Their Innu language, the last surviving member of the 2 branch of the Khoisan language family, has between 10 and 15 fluent speakers, all of them elderly. Their mitochondrial haplogroup, L0D. Their genetic continuity to the Matjes River sequence, confirmed. Their language, extinguishing in real time in living bodies on a specific piece of land with a legal title and a recorded address. Actually, while we're here, in our last video, we looked at the Neanderthal percentage still sitting inside your genome, usually between 1 and 4% depending on your ancestry. What this episode is turning over is the opposite side of that question. Not what ancient DNA you absorbed along the way, but how much of the original human genome any of us still carry. If you've ever taken an ancestry test, drop your haplogroup result in the comments. Let's see how far any of us have actually traveled from the start. Now, among all currently sampled San populations, every single group shows a minimum of 9% non-San admixture. Even the Juhowansi, previously believed to be the least affected. That means the undiluted ancient Southern African genome, the genome that produced those variants that ran unedited for 200,000 years, exists in no living person on Earth. It is present in every descendant as an echo, as a signal, as something you can detect and measure but cannot fully reconstruct. A ghost that is everywhere and nowhere complete. Around 620 CE, while the first Islamic caliphates were beginning to take shape, while the Byzantine Empire was entering its final long contraction, while the Tang dynasty was consolidating its hold on China, a group of pastoralists crossed into southern Africa from the north. They brought cattle, they brought sheep, and they brought DNA. Their genetics were a mixture of East African and Levantine-enriched ancestry, a profile related, the genomic analysis shows, to the modern Amhara people of Ethiopia. They were not invaders in any military sense. The record contains no evidence of sudden population collapse, no genetic signature of violent replacement. They arrived, they settled, they merged, and across 9% to 30% of the Southern African gene pool, depending on which community you sample, their DNA entered a lineage that had received no external genome for 200,000 years. The Schlebusch 2017 study first established this admixture signature. The Jakobsson 2025 study confirmed it with higher coverage data across a larger ancient sample. The contact event was real. The date was specific, and the word the genetics literature uses for what happened, admixture, is a procedural, neutral word for something that was anything but procedural. A 200,000-year-old boundary was crossed in a single contact event. The genomes that crossed it exist now in every living Khoisan individual. The boundary does not exist anymore. The Nama people of Namibia, Khoi-speaking pastoralists, carry the clearest living record of that moment. Their ancestry shows approximately 25 to 30% East African admixture. Their material culture includes cattle herding practices directly traceable to the arriving group. They are, in their own genomes, the living document of the breach. The generation at which the 200,000-year seal became permeable, and then never closed again. Everything I just told you, hold on to it, because it's about to mean something completely different. The admixture group, the pastoralists who ended 200,000 years of Southern African genetic isolation, carried Levantine-enriched ancestry in their lineage, which means that several millennia before they arrived in Southern Africa, their ancestors had passed through or near the ancient Near East. Two populations on opposite ends of a continent, separated by every geographic and cultural marker available, carrying in their genomes a molecular thread connecting them to the same ancient region. The group that ended the isolation had, inside their own history, traces of a world that the Southern African population had never encountered, and neither of them knew, nor had the other people, 7,000 kilometers away, who share the same story. North Sentinel Island, Bay of Bengal, 2018. A small boat approaches from the northwest. The people on shore respond the way they have responded to every outside approach in recorded history. They are the last confirmed group on Earth with zero genetic contact with the post-contact world. Their population? Somewhere between 50 and 400 individuals, depending on the estimate. Their mitochondrial haplogroup, M31A1, a direct descendant of the southern coastal dispersal out of Africa approximately 70,000 years ago. Their genetic isolation, estimated to have begun no later than 30,000 years ago. There are three things to hold at once here. The third one is the one that changes everything. First, the Andamanese represent a separate branch of the out-of-Africa dispersal, the southern coastal route, distinct in both geography and genetics from the southern African lineage. Second, genetic analysis of related groups, the Jarawa and Onge of the Andaman Islands, who have accepted limited modern contact, confirms near-complete genetic isolation for tens of thousands of years, with admixture appearing only through post-colonial contact in the 19th century. And third, the outcome is structurally identical to what happened in southern Africa. A long, deep isolation. A contact event. Admixture that is now measurable in every living descendant. And an original genome that cannot be fully recovered from any living person. Two populations. Two oceans. Two different genetic lineages, the L0D branch of Southern Africa, the M31 branch of the Andamans. Two different isolation periods, 200,000 years versus 30,000 years. Two different contact events, one around 620 CE, one in the 19th century, and one identical outcome. The Onge people of Little Andaman Island number approximately 100 individuals as of the last reliable count. Their children speak a language that mixes Anga and Hindi in ways the elders did not grow up with. The original Anga language has no published complete grammar. Their haplogroup, M31, is present at 100% frequency among those who remain. The genome will outlast the language will outlast the culture, and all three are already in decline. This parallel is not offered as explanation. It is not a coincidence being dressed up as a law. It is evidence of a pattern. When a human population achieves sufficient geographic isolation for sufficient time, on any continent, in any climate, in any era, it diverges in ways that cannot be reconstructed from its admixed descendants. This has happened on the southern tip of Africa. It has happened in the Bay of Bengal. It has almost certainly happened in other places we haven't yet read the record from. And the migration that might have changed the Southern African outcome, the northward movement that left traces of Southern African DNA in individuals from present-day Malawi 8,000 years ago, failed to take hold. The signal fades. The migrant's genetic trace disappears within a few generations. One valley crossed or not crossed, one winter survived or not. Had that migration established a stable population further north, the entire subsequent contact event might have been redirected. The 200,000-year genome might have continued, or it ends. What it means for something to end, genetically, is more precise than you have been told. The Jakobsson 2025 study identified 490 genetic variants specific to Homo sapiens, not found in Neanderthals, not found in Denisovans, not found in any other primate. Of those 490, the team isolated 79 that actually alter gene function, variants that change how proteins are built, how organs operate, how the body conducts its most fundamental processes. Every living human being on Earth carries these 79 variants. They're the molecular definition of what it means to be our species. And their earliest recoverable form was assembled first in the population buried at Matjes River Rock Shelter. 7 of those variants affect kidney morphology and function. The hypothesis the team put forward is specific. These changes may be directly related to the human body's unique sweating-based cooling system, the mechanism that lets us regulate body temperature through the controlled loss of fluid. Neanderthals didn't have it in the same form. Denisovans didn't have it. The ability to run in midday heat, the ability to outlast prey across open terrain, the ability to endure. Traceable in its genomic origin to that isolated population above the Indian Ocean. More than 40% of the 490 variants are linked to neurons, to synaptic growth, to the cognitive architecture that modern neuroscience connects to attention, the capacity to hold a thread of thought across time, to follow an argument from premise to conclusion, to stay with something complex long enough to understand it. Stay with me, because this next part is the reason this video exists. The ability you are using right now to follow this sentence, to track this argument, to hold the thread across paragraphs, that capacity is associated with a suite of genetic variants first identified in a population that lived in a rock shelter for 10,000 years. Your attention is their inheritance, and you cannot give it back. Now, here is what the data actually says, and I want you to hear this clearly because it is the most destabilizing finding in this entire field right now. The ancient hunter-gatherers buried at Matjes River, who invented new stone tools, who developed new cultural practices, who changed how they lived across 9 millennia without any outside population arriving to prompt the change, those individuals fall entirely outside the measured range of living human genetic variation. That includes the variation present in the Khoisan people most closely descended from them. The full genetic depth of what it means to be Homo sapiens cannot be recovered from any person alive today, not because this population died, because we changed them. And every Homo sapiens specific variant in your body carries the echo of what was there before the change. Professor Jakobsson, describing the kidney findings at the December 2025 press briefing, said this: "The adaptation may be related to humans' specific water retention and body cooling system, properties that Neanderthals and Denisovans lacked." What he was saying, in scientific language, is that the ability to survive the sun, to sweat, to persist, to run across open ground at noon, was first shaped here, in this population, in this place. And what the immune function data now suggests is that the admixture event of 1400 years ago may have done something more than change the ancestry percentages in living populations. Among the 490 Homo sapiens-specific variants, the team found a cluster linked to immune response. Some of these variants appear at highest frequency in communities with the deepest San ancestry. They appear at lower frequencies in admixed populations. The question the field has not yet answered, the one that keeps this story open, is whether the post-contact disease burden that devastated San communities in the 18th and 19th centuries was partly a consequence of losing those immune variants. Whether what happened in the bodies of those communities, the epidemics, the die-offs, was not just a historical tragedy, but a molecular one. At the molecular level, the witness is still there. Northern Cape Province, South Africa. 50,000 hectares of Kalahari returned by legal title in 1999. Approximately 1,500 adults. A community called the Khoisan, whose land claim was one of the first successful indigenous land restitution cases in post-apartheid South Africa. They have legal ownership of the ground their ancestors occupied for tens of thousands of years. They have a document that says so, and they have between 10 and 15 fluent speakers of NU, the last surviving member of the two branch of the Khoisan language family, all of them elderly. In 2020, Professor Karina Schlebusch published an analysis through Uppsala University that confirmed what multiple independent studies had been converging on for years. The Khoisan ancestral lineage represents the deepest confirmed population divergence in Homo sapiens, not the oldest individual genome, the deepest population split, the oldest branch point in the entire human family tree. Every sampled group carries a minimum of 9% non-San admixture, even the least affected communities, which means that somewhere inside the living genomes of the Khoisan, 1,500 people in the Kalahari with a land title and a dying language, the molecular record of the oldest confirmed human divergence is still running. Partial, diluted, but present. What they found next changed everything they thought they knew about this. There is a specific mitochondrial marker, a variant within the L0D lineage, that appears only in individuals with confirmed San ancestry. It does not appear in admixed populations at the same frequency. It does not appear outside the L0D and L0K lineages. Most people who carry it have never been told it exists. Commercial databases list it as a sub-Saharan African marker, which is accurate in the way that calling the sky overhead is accurate, technically correct, and almost entirely uninformative about what it actually is. What it actually is, a molecular witness to the oldest confirmed population divergence in our species. Present in the Juhwaansi in Namibia and Botswana. Present in the Karechi people of South Africa's Karoo region. Present in 60 to 71% of the mixed ancestry colored population of South Africa. A silent inheritance from Khoisan maternal lines that contributed the foundational ancestry of that community. And the divergence between Click language families mirrors the genomic divergence almost perfectly. Both records, the linguistic and the molecular, were made by the same isolation. Both are now simultaneously in the process of becoming unrecoverable. There was a woman named Elsie Valboy. In 2017, she was 73 years old. She was one of the last fluent speakers of NU. She described in an interview what it was like to teach her grandchildren fragments of the language, clicks and tones they could reproduce phonetically, but no longer attached meaning to. She held, simultaneously, in her larynx and in her L0D maternal haplogroup, two systems of inherited information, one linguistic, one molecular, both in the process of becoming something that could be described but not spoken, measured but not lived. Some of the people who carry haplogroup L0D are watching this video right now. Most of them have never been told what it means. They know the label. They don't know the address it belongs to. If your mitochondrial haplogroup result shows L or L0 or L0D or any subclade of L0D, you carry the direct maternal inheritance of the oldest confirmed population divergence in the scientific record. Your molecular address traces back to a rock shelter above the Indian Ocean, a specific place, a specific people, a lineage that was genetically isolated for 200,000 years before the first external genome arrived. You were not told this. No one told you. The databases list L0D as sub-Saharan African origin, which is technically accurate in the same way that calling the address of a cathedral a building is technically accurate. It says nothing about what is inside, and yet the data said the exact opposite of what the databases had been built to show. In 2022, a team of 4 researchers working through the Mito Project sat down with hundreds of thousands of mitochondrial sequences and started looking for anything that didn't fit. Paul Maier at the University of California, Riverside, along with colleagues at the University of Maryland and Family Tree DNA, found 19 sequences that didn't belong to any recognized branch of the human tree. After analysis and cross-referencing with thousands of additional samples, they confirmed the existence of a previously unclassified haplogroup. They called it L7. It branched from the main human tree approximately 100,000 years ago. It had been carried by individuals in Eastern Africa, individuals who had taken commercial DNA tests, who had results in existing databases, without anyone recognizing what those results contained. A 100,000-year-old human maternal lineage, in a database, unclassified, for years. The field had assumed, for 2 decades, that 7 major African mitochondrial haplogroups, L0 through L6, captured the complete ancient structure of maternal human diversity. The catalog, it turned out, was not closed. It had never been closed. We have been counting the rooms in a house we haven't finished entering. If you've ever taken a DNA ancestry test, here's something you deserve to know. The result you received was generated by comparing your sequence to a reference database. That database has been revised multiple times since 2003, and the ancient Southern African genome, the one that falls entirely outside all measured modern human genetic variation, the one that the Jakobsson 2025 study published in December of last year, was not in any reference database before that study, which means every ancestry result generated before December 2025 was produced without the oldest reference point. The most divergent human genome ever documented was simply not there. Every result, every haplogroup assignment, every percentage, a draft, built from an incomplete map. If you want to understand what the revised map is showing, subscribe, because this field is moving faster right now than it has at any point in its history. And the next set of results from the ancient genome databases will change what you think you know about where you come from. Again, the woman in the drawer at Iziko Museum, Matjes River 1, jaw intact, 3rd molar rooted, dead for 7,900 years, carries genetic variants that shaped your ability to pay attention to this sentence. She has no descendants who remember her name. She has millions of descendants who carry her biology. The distance between those 2 facts is the full length of what we have lost, and the full weight of what we cannot give back.